Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today I'm talking about some great albums that I picked up over the last few years that I had never listened to before buying them, and I was really impressed with them once I did. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So when I was younger, I used to do this all the time. You go to the record store, pick up some CDs, pick up some cassettes, whatever it was, just because the album art looked cool, or you'd heard of the band before, and you'd get home and listen to it and be absolutely blown away by the quality of the music on it. So as record prices have increased over the last few years, I still try to do this every once in a while, but I found myself really kind of getting away from that habit. I'll really try to stream stuff before I listen to it. But I have picked up, I don't know, I think I've got about 10 albums here that I picked up over the last several years that I just bought on a whim, like I said, just because I'd heard of the band before, or the album art looked cool, or they came recommended to me. And I was absolutely blown away by these albums. And in some instances, really kind of changed my musical direction overall. I guess I should add that I excluded any kind of new releases from this list. All these albums I'm going to talk about had all been previously released by the time I grabbed them. Some of them for, several decades by the time I actually listened to it. But, because I still do regularly, not regularly, but semi-regularly, every few weeks or so, pick up new releases that I hadn't streamed yet. I typically don't do that on my way to the record store. So I took those out of the list, out of the running for these. But the first album is one that I'm really surprised I never listened to because I absolutely love this band. I'm not the biggest metal guy, but this is definitely one of my exceptions when it comes to metal, and that's Black Sabbath. Heaven and Hell was an album that I grew up a big Ozzy fan, and of course I love the Ozzy era of Black Sabbath. So I think that's why I never really listened to either this. I guess I could have added Mob Rules into this also. I didn't listen to either one of the Dio albums when it was released. Obviously, it was probably within the last 2 years that I finally sat down and listened to both of those albums. I'm not a big fan of Mob Rules, but Heaven and Hell is probably one of my favorite Black Sabbath albums now. It's an unbelievable album. It was very different than the Ozzy stuff. And Ronnie James Dio is definitely a different kind of singer than Ozzy is. And and even when it comes to like Dio's solo stuff, I'm not a big fan of that. But what he did on this album, the way it works with these Black Sabbath songs, man, it's just an absolute classic. So a couple of years ago in the Vinyl Den Facebook group, I had posted that I was listening to one of the Greta Van Fleet albums. I don't remember which one it was. It was probably Battle of the Garden's Gate, actually, because I think it was 2021 when I was listening to this. And someone posted in there, hey, if you like Greta Van Fleet, you really got to check out the next band's album, because it was definitely different than anything else that was going on in rock around that time, and really even today. But it was the debut album from Dirty Honey, and that was kind of all they left it at. They were like, hey, this is a kind of like a throwback to some older rock music. Definitely check it out if you like Greta Van Fleet. And the first time I listened to this album, I was instantly hooked on it. If you haven't listened to Dirty Honey, I haven't listened to their new album yet. But this one it's a great album. And if you listen to it, it has, at least when I listened to it, I think it has like a very strong like early 90s Black Crowes vibe to it. And it's just an album that, to this day, a couple years after it came out, I think it had been 2021 when this album came out. So it was probably not too long after the album came out that I listened to it. But even a couple years later, man, it's still one I listen to pretty regularly. There seems to be some kind of big reissue every record store day that, gets enough hype that makes me kind of interested in it. And this next one is one that I decided to grab. Actually, I hadn't decided to grab it. It wasn't on any of my lists leading up to record store day. It was actually one that was like sitting in line like an hour before the store opened. And I was like, you know what? I love a couple albums from this band. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this one and check it out. And it's an album that I've been so impressed with that has really kind of changed my overall perception of this band. But that album is Sea of Memories by Bush. When 16 Stone, when Razor Blade Suitcase came out, I loved both of those albums. But really after that, my musical interest really kind of changed. I really got into punk and ska and some other stuff, and didn't really check out really any of the band's other albums until this one came out for Record Store Day, I think last year or the year before. And I love this album so much. It's made me go back and check out all the other albums from Bush. And I'm now going through and trying to collect all their albums on vinyl. Well, I know there's a couple of them that aren't available on vinyl, but and another one that's like super expensive. I'm hopefully they'll get a reissue sooner rather than later. But this is an album that beginning to end, man, there's just not a bad track on it. I guess along the same lines as Sea of Memories, this next album is one where, you know, I had kind of lost track of the band, hadn't listened to any of their stuff for probably 15 plus years. And then I was in a record store one day and said, I'm just going to buy this album, check it out. And it's really changed my perception of the band. They're one of my favorite bands overall now. And that album is Lightning Bolt by Pearl Jam. And Pearl Jam is one of my favorite bands of all time now. And I was always a big fan of their early stuff. The 10 was an incredible album. Versus was an incredible album. I love Vitology. But really after that, it was kind of along the same lines as Bush. My musical interest just changed after that. And I never really listened to anything. I think the last album I listened to when it was released was the Avocado album, I think was probably the last one. And then I completely lost the band after that. And when I sat down and listened to it, man, I just absolutely love this album. There's so many incredible songs on here from beginning to end. I think it's probably one of Pearl Jam's top, 5 or 6 albums. I know a lot of people out there probably won't agree with that, but it was this album that really kind of brought me back to the band. And I've listened to all their stuff pretty regularly now. I've got all their stuff on vinyl, and it was really because of this album that pulled me back to the band. Out of all the albums I'm going to talk about in this video, I don't think any album changed me as much as this next one did. This one completely brought me into a whole new genre of music that I absolutely love now. And it was mainly because of this album. I really hadn't listened to any other jazz music before I listened to this one. And that album is Love Supreme by John Coltrane. And Coltrane is my favorite jazz musician now. And I don't know if it's because of A Love Supreme or if it's just from every other great album he ever released. But this is an album that, of course I'd heard it before. I've heard of John Coltrane. I've heard all the hype around this album. And then I don't even think, I was in like a Target one day, I think it was. And I saw it sitting on a shelf and they had it on sale for like, I don't know, $18. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to buy it and check it out. And ever since then, I've been hooked on jazz. I listen to jazz music. It's probably one of my most listened to genres now. And it's really because of A Love Supreme. The next album is kind of funny because when it was first released, I saw this album literally everywhere. I'd go to my record store, there'd be copies on the wall, there'd be copies in the bin. I'd go to Walmart, and there's 10 copies in Walmart. And I didn't hear really any kind of hype around this album. And then it like slowly started building, and it was probably maybe a month or two after this album came out that I was finally like, look, I'm just going to sit down, I'm going to pick up a copy, sit down and listen to it. And man, I was blown away by this album. And that is a debut album from the Black Pumas. Black Pumas is a really interesting album because it's like funk meets soul meets R&B, and it's like got this really interesting feel to it. And there's really nothing else like this out there that is being made, at least right now in the mainstream. And man, this album is one that is probably one of my most. It's probably the album that I'm most impressed with over the last few years. So if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know I'm a big MXPX fan. The next 2 albums are both albums I picked up solely because Mike Herrera from MXPX was involved in. The first one is one that I'm surprised I never listened to it. It came out back in, I think, 1997, 96 or 97 is when it came out. And it was probably maybe 2018 or 2019 when I bought this copy of this album. And I had never listened to it before. I only knew one track off of it, and that's because one track was re-recorded on a MXPX album that I absolutely love. But the album is Let's Play House by the Cooties. The Cooties is a side project of MXPX, and I think 90 Pound Wuss were the 2 bands that the members were from. It's got Mike Herrera and I think Yuri Ruley from MXPX on here. And it's a really fun album. It's like mid-90s pop punk stuff, kind of the stuff you would expect from a Tooth and Nail label. It's of course, MXPX and 90 Pound Wuss were both on Tooth and Nail at the time. And it's an album that I'm surprised didn't get bigger than it was. I know this kind of punk wasn't really that popular, say like 96, 97, but I'm surprised it didn't gain in popularity once like Blink-182 got really big and really kind of opened the door for that style. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was kind of a casual Goldfinger fan. I like some of their songs, but I was never really in love with any of their albums. And then I think it was 2017, John Feldman kind of put together this supergroup version of Goldfinger. Had Travis Barker on drums, had Mike Herrera on bass, so of course I was really interested in the album. And then I listened to it and was really blown away by the album. This is easily the best thing that Goldfinger's ever released. They have released one album since then that was just kind of okay, but the overall quality on this album from beginning to end, there's not a bad track, and it just has that like fun late 90s, early 2000s style on it. Another band that, I guess I was just kind of a casual fan of in the 90s. Never really dug into any of the other stuff that they released in the 2000s. I definitely have done that now. Because of this next album, I've gone back and listened to and really kind of fell in love with a lot of their other stuff. I don't really think that they've released anything really great. They've only had one really great album since this EP was released, and that was in 2006. And that EP is Never Trust a Hippie. This is a NoFX EP that was reissued, I think, last year. And this was an EP that came out right before Wolves and Wolves Clothing was released in 2006. Like I said, that's a great album. I think that's, at least in my opinion, the last great NoFX album. But Never Trust a Hippie is an EP that is just, I was just blown away by. And I remember like talking about it online. I texted a couple of my other friends that like punk music and was like, if you haven't listened to this, you have to check it out. I would definitely put this up there with some of the best stuff that NoFX has ever released. And then the last album is one that I probably rave about the most to anyone that's willing to listen to me talk about punk music. And it's an album that, I'd never heard of this band before. I would put this one up there as one of the top 5 punk albums of the 2000s. That's how much I love this album. I think it was like during the lockdowns or later part of the lockdowns, Fat Mike did a live stream from his backyard, had this band on. They did like a little small set, and then that's all I heard about them. And actually, I forgot about them altogether after that. And there was probably like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 months later, someone in the Facebook group posted a picture of their album. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember that band. So I got online, ordered a copy of it. When I got it, I sat down and listened to it, and I was absolutely floored by it. And that album is Dancing with the Curse by Get Dead. Like I said, easily one of the top, in my opinion, one of the top 5 punk albums of the 2000s. I would definitely put this up there with anything else that's been released over the last 20, 25 years. And it's a straightforward punk album. This is very much so in the same vein as like an Out Come the Wolves in the 90s. It's just kind of like straightforward, in-your-face punk music. And they just do a great job with this album. And I've listened to a couple of their other albums that they released before this, and it's not quite the same, but, I'd love to see what this band does in the future. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what some of your favorite blind buys have been over the last few years. I really could have went on there. I've bought so many great albums over the years, but these are like the top, the first like 10 that really popped into my mind. Let me know what you guys think, though. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep all spinning. Peace.